Good morning. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Larry. Today I'm going to talk about what I learned from losing everything. I lost everything at one point in my life. And I know in the comments, I already know in advance, I'm going to catch a lot of grief, a lot of negative comments. How could you be so stupid? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Well, I was young and dumb, 30, early 30s. Only I was young and dumb on steroids. I thought, well, if this a little bit works, then let's do a whole lot of this. So when I got out of college in 1976, I had a degree in finance and business, and I couldn't find a job in my field. So I went to work for the summer at the local General Motors plant. They were hiring summer help, and I ended up staying there 10 years, got into skilled trades, and I left there 10 years later when they closed the plant down. But during that time, this all happened during that time frame, that 10-year time frame. Bought our first house. It was a fixer-upper, to put it mildly. It was a fixer-upper. It was nasty. I mean, it was in a decent section of town. It was an old house. Excuse me. It was in a decent section of town, but it was so bad they used the floor vents to dump their ashtrays. Oh, my wife about gagged over that one. But we cleaned it up, and about a year later, we sold it, made a nice little profit. We bought another property, and we kept that. We lived in that and kept that a couple of years. Then we sold that, made a nice little profit on that one for a nice down payment on our next property. And I got to thinking, man, if this works on 3 properties, why can't it work on 20 or 30? So that's what I did. I figured out a way to buy them, fix them up, and rent them. Now, if I'd have bought them, fixed them up, and sold them, I'd be a multimillionaire today, but I'd also be probably morally bankrupt. But that's another story. I'll get to that some at the end of this video. So what happened was we had all these properties. We were doing real well. The cash flow was decent. It wasn't great. We weren't taking wild vacations or anything. The cash flow was decent. It was good enough where I could hire a property manager, a family, a couple, and their kids. They moved into one of our houses and they managed the property for me. And it worked out fine until 2 or 3 months in a row, I had like 15 houses come vacant at the same time. Now, I'm not sure how many I had because these are all distant memories. I had, I'm not sure how many. I had between 20 and 30 properties worth of million and a half dollars. That was a lot of money back then. That was a lot of houses back then. But when they moved out over about a 2 or 3 month period and vacant, they needed work. I had no money to put into them, and I was still working a full-time job. The whole house of cards just fell. We lost a new house that I had built during that time frame. I built a new house. It was way ahead of its time, actually. It was a passive solar house. I designed it, and I was a general contractor on it. And I talked to the owners about 10 years ago, and they say it's still working really well. They have very low utility bills. But anyway, so we moved back into one of our rentals, and the only reason we were allowed to keep that was because it had no equity. So there I was. It was so bad. It was so bad. I had shingles. I was so stressed from shingles. I'm sure most people watching this channel knows what shingles are. It was horrible. One of the most painful things I've ever gone through in my life. It lasted 2 or 3 months. I did. I went to the doctor. He said, Larry, if you continue doing what you're doing, you're going to be dead soon. You'll die of a heart attack, stress. At that point, I went home and talked to my wife, and I said, we got to do something. So we decided to walk away from it. We walked away from everything. We walked away from houses. We walked away from cars. I mean, we lost everything. We lost our house. We lost all the rentals. We lost our cars. In fact, they called me one day and said, if you don't make your car payment, we're going to come after it. I said, well, please just knock on the door, and I'll hand you the keys. And it was a day or two later. That's exactly what they did. And it worked out all right. But we just literally lost everything. I had to start all over. I had 3 kids under the age of 12. My wife didn't work outside the home. I was still working at the time. And then the last shoe dropped, and that was General Motors closed the doors on the plant. So my income was gone also. So I had no job, no house, no cars. I mean, it was a rough time in my life, to say the least. But these are the things I learned from that. I learned that material possessions are temporary. They're temporary at best. We get to use them for a while, but they're temporary. The things we don't see are eternal. The things we see, like this camera I'm shooting on, or the tripod it's sitting on, those are all temporary. Those are all temporary. My whole view on cars, I've never been a big car guy, although they did repossess a pretty nice car at the time. Um, I've never been a big car guy, so my view on cars is if it gets me to point A to point B in relative comfort, I am one happy camper. The house, we live in probably what would be considered upper middle class house, uh, but we have lower lower middle class income. So I'll let you figure that one out. We live below our means, to say the least. But my view on just everything changed as far as material possessions goes. Those aren't the important things in life. Here's a big thing that changed in my life, and that was friends. I lost so many friends over this. 50% of, I'm guessing now, I'm guessing 50% of my friends were just glad it didn't happen to them. And the other 50%, they didn't care. They didn't care that happened to me. As long as it didn't happen to them, they just didn't care. My view on family changed drastically. Now I come from my side of the family is rather large, lots of aunts and uncles and cousins and sisters and all that. When this tragedy happened, and it was a tragedy because my kids, I mean, I was so concerned about my kids. I knew I could live with it, but my kids were going through a lot of stuff at the time, and not one person in my family offered one nickel of help. Not one person offered, is there anything we can do? Can we bring you a meal? Can we do anything? Not one person. In fact, after a few years went by, I had determined they were glad it happened because I was going to become more successful than they were, and they didn't want that, so they were glad it happened. There's one person. My wife comes from a very small family. She's got one sister, and her mother and father were divorced at the time, and my mother-in-law stepped up. She did. She didn't have the monetary means to step up, but she did. I'm sure, I don't remember exactly, but I'm sure she probably gave us grocery money more than once. But one thing she did for a 2 or 3 year period is she bought our kids shoes when they started school, because kids and shoes, it's kind of a big deal at school. Even back then it was kind of a big deal. So she did that, and I was forever in her debt, and I paid her back multiple times over later on. But my family views changed. My family, some of my family, they're not blood family. They're family, though. The biggest thing I learned out of this was humility. I don't know if back in the day, you remember these things you remember these things we called newspapers? Well, every Friday when you file bankruptcy, every Friday they list your name, the properties. Now I had a bunch of properties. It was in there every day. They have to do it for like 3 months for it to be legal. Now it's all online. You have to go searching for it. But back then you could just pick up a paper and read it. And it was so embarrassing to me. It just humbled me. I was still working at the time, and all the guys I worked with, they would harass me or ignore me or make fun of me, or it was just tough. It was just a tough time. But I became very humbled, very humble. It humbles you real quick. But the best thing that came out of it was I had new priorities in life, and this is how I came out of it. Family, my immediate family, not blood family, my immediate family was the most important thing to me. And I'd worked after General Motors shut down, I worked for 2 or 3 companies. They went out of business, and I beat around to a couple jobs, and none of them were successful. I was barely getting by, and one day I came home. The company was getting ready to close their doors, and I came home from a party or something, and I told the wife, I said, they're closing down. I said, I'm going to paint some apartments until I can find a real job. And she was okay with that. So I started painting some apartments. Never did I realize 35 years later that I would still be doing that, but it worked out great. At the same time, when we were broke and at our poorest materially, we were at our brokest I've ever been in my life, before or since. Our church that we attended, we're having this building program. They said, you know, and people would get up on the platform and they'd say, yeah, I was going to pay my house off. I'm going to take this 20,000 and put it towards this program. I didn't relate to those people at all. These are people with money, and I couldn't relate. So what we did, we cut out the newspaper. We cut out a couple little things because we didn't have anything to cut. It amounted to about $50 a month extra. And that's what we did. And I expected to be blessed, not necessarily financially, but I did expect to be blessed out of it because that's one of God's promises. So about 6 months went by and nothing happened. We were able to pay our bills. I was working 10, 12 hours a day. I was able to pay our bills until one day at a pro show, some guy stuck a paint sprayer in my hand and said, hey, you know, you ought to try this. And I thought, man, I don't have any credit. I don't have any money. He said, I'll tell you what, we'll finance it for you for $20 a month. It was something really minuscule. And I said, well, I can afford that. So we did that. My life changed forever. I went from making $15 an hour, basically, you know, by the job. I was getting paid by the job, to making 25 within a year or two. After I started hiring crews, I was making $50, $75 an hour net. And things just really took off. And but I came out of a whole different set of priorities, So I did survive it, and all the better for it. What happened, the bottom line is, I lost everything. But what I found was Larry. Larry was hiding in there. The real Larry was hiding inside. And I found me. And I'm eternally, literally, eternally grateful for that. I found me. Now, if I would have been successful, let's say I did the real estate thing a little differently and sold some here and there and had some cash set back, and there's not a doubt in my mind I would have failed at some point. Maybe not financially, but I'd have been morally bankrupt because I have some personality, we'll call it personality tendencies that aren't good. And there's not a doubt in my mind I would have been morally bankrupt within a short time. Well, that's all I've got for now. If you got anything out of this, like, share, subscribe. And next time I'll come up with something a little bit more positive. But I learned a lot of things by losing everything. And leave me comments if you have anything to say about this. But if you got anything out of this, like, share, subscribe. Until we meet again, and we continue to press on towards that goal.